Welcome everyone to the Marine Mammal Science Editors Select Seminar. My name's Sophia and I'm a student member at large alongside Teresa, who's on the other panel screen. And I'm here to present a talk by Grace Russell. Grace has recently completed her PhD at the Southern Cross University in New South Wales. And for the past 4 years, she has studied the body condition of humpback whales and pygmy blue whales, exploring the relationship between migration timing and body condition, as well as energetic usage over their migration. And during her PhD, Grace created the Fat Whales Project, and now her research focuses on the energetics, physiology, and morphology of cetacean species in Australia. Grace is an experienced remote pilot using drones and has worked on marine mammal research projects in Bremer Bay, working on orca, Nigula Reef, working on blue whales, and the Great Barrier Reef, working on dolphins. The article Grace is presenting today will be available as open access, and we will share that with you in the chat. Please use the Q&A function to ask any questions that you may have during or after the talk. We will monitor that. Try avoid putting questions in the chat, but us panel members will be monitoring all the questions and read them out to Grace at the end of the talk. And with that, Grace, please go ahead.
Hi guys, thank you so much, Sophia, and thanks for the lovely introduction, and thank you for inviting me to make this talk and this presentation. So as Sophia said, I have just completed my PhD in December last year, so it's still very new to me not being a PhD candidate, but that was at Southern Cross University over in Northern Rivers of New South Wales. And my whole PhD, which Sophia gave a lovely introduction of, basically looking at the body condition of the two baleen whale, well, the two populations of humpback whales in Australia. So that's the East Coast population and the West Coast population, as well as the pygmy blue whales that migrate along the West Coast of Australia here. And this presentation is focusing on the second chapter of my PhD, and that is on the West Coast humpback whale population, looking at the cost of their migration and their migratory timing. Cool, so I will play some videos, but I will speak before I play the videos just because we had a bit of audio before. And yeah, so for a little bit of an introduction, I wanted to give you a real basic biology of humpback whales for those of you who might not be really familiar with them. So humpback whales are a cosmopolitan species, basically meaning you can find them in all ocean basins around the world. They are a medium-sized baleen whale, and by medium, I mean they are approximately 13 to 16 meters in length. And the female is usually the larger of the two sexes, which I really love saying, and I'm quite proud of, because especially when I was collecting data on the East Coast of Australia, I would be on the headland and a lot of the public would walk past, and a few people would actually comment, "Oh, have you seen any big bulls lately?" And I would be like, "No, I haven't seen the big bulls, but I've seen the big girls out there." And so they would actually be quite shocked to find out that the females are the larger of the two. And when I say they are a baleen whale, basically they have a baleen inside their mouth instead of teeth, and this allows them to basically filter feed out. So when they engulf their prey, they open up their throat pleats or their rorquals to engulf large amounts of prey. And with that, they get a lot of water. So they're able to filter out that water and keep the prey in their mouth with their baleen plates. Humpback whales, especially in Australia, were actually hunted to near extinction from whaling. On the West Coast here, there was at lowest estimates about 500 individuals left. And on the East Coast, there was about 200 to 300 individuals left. Both populations have actually made remarkable recoveries, and on the West Coast here, we're looking at exceeding 35,000 individuals, and similar on the East Coast as well. And because of this recovery, They were actually taken off the endangered species list in Australia in 2022. So I'm just going to play some of the videos here, and you'll see that on the bottom right, there's actually a blue whale, but that's because I have never filmed a humpback whale feeding before. But I just wanted you guys to get that picture and that image of that engulfing of the prey and the extending of those throat plates. So in terms of their migration, so humpback whales undertake one of the longest migrations in mammalian history. So here in Australia, that means they go from their Antarctic feeding grounds where they can exploit their food source down there. So that's their feeding grounds, and they mainly feed on krill. And then they migrate up both coasts of Australia and to the warmer waters. On the east coast, that's the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park, and on the west coast, that's Camden Sound or near the Kimberley area. Now, humpback whales are what we call a capital breeder. So that basically means they finance this vast migration with the stored energy that they gain on their feeding grounds. So they're not significantly replenishing their energy reserves, meaning they don't feed often when they take these migrations. And because they're fasting for the majority of this time, we can actually see physical changes in their body. And from those physical changes, I can actually assign them a body condition. So what is body condition? What do I mean when I say body condition of a humpback whale? So it is defined as the amount of stored energy that an individual carries in relation to their structural body size. So basically their length. So if we look at these two individuals, you can see the one on the left and the one on the right. If they were exactly the same length, the one on the left is carrying significantly less body condition compared to the one on the right, which you can see is plumper and beefier. So why is body condition important? Well, it enables them to withstand such long periods of fasting. So it enables them to make these vast migrations. And it's also really important on their breeding grounds because they're doing energetically demanding activities like breeding, reproducing, competing for mates, as well as calving and lactating. And lactating is one of the most energetically demanding activities a mammal can do. So it's really important to have enough body condition and stored body condition to be able to give that calf enough energy. And the amount of energy a mum has is directly related to the amount of energy that she is able to give to her calf, which is super important for the calf's growth rate and survival. So what do I mean when I say body condition and migration timing? What exactly are we looking at? So because we can see those physical changes in their body and because they've got their feeding grounds and their breeding grounds in different places, we are potentially looking at any trade-offs that they are making between staying on their feeding grounds, feeding for longer, getting more body condition, more energy, or leaving and getting maximized breeding opportunities on their breeding ground or maximized time in the warmer, more protected waters for their calf. And because they make these vast migrations, we can actually look at the changes of their body condition over time. So what is it like at the beginning of their migration and what is it like at the end of their migration? And humpback whales are really good ecosystem indicators, basically meaning they can infer the health of their important habitats. So if we're looking on their feeding grounds, if they're not in very good body condition, what is that saying about their prey quality and quantity down in Antarctica? But also on their breeding grounds, what stresses are they having to face while they are undertaking really important life history stages like breeding and calving? And it is actually quite nice and really important to be able to monitor the health of populations through time. So what were they doing 5 years ago compared to now, and why has their health or their body condition changed, or is it staying the same? So for this chapter of the PhD, the second chapter, focusing on the West Coast humpback whales, what were my specific aims for this chapter? So I basically had two aims or two research questions. And the first one is looking at their body condition loss over the entire breeding season in Australian waters for the West Australian population. So basically, when I see individuals going north, and then after they make that vast migration, I see them going south again. What's the difference? What has changed? And how much condition have they lost over that breeding season? And the second one is I wanted to see if their migration timing was influenced by their body condition. So basically, when I see individuals coming north, are the first ones in different body condition compared to the last ones? So if you're a really fat whale, do you migrate earlier or do you migrate later compared to a skinnier whale that's potentially not in good body condition? So for my methodology, I had 3 study sites in Western Australia, which was really nice. I got to visit some amazing places, and I now live in one of those amazing places. So my first study site was in the southwest of Western Australia at a place called Cape Lewin in Flinders Bay in Augusta. And I was looking at the humpback whales traveling north here. The second site in the southwest was Cape Naturalist in Geograph Bay, Dunsborough, which is an absolutely beautiful place. And it's also the same place where we sampled the blue whales. And that was used for their southern migration. We also had a third study site, which was the Perth Basin, and that was in Fremantle, and that was used for the southern migration because they usually come, or humpback whales usually come closer to the coastline during their southern migration. So we could use the Perth Basin for that. Whereas the northern migration, they're usually a little bit further offshore, but they do come close to shore near Flinders Bay. They come right into the bay and near Geograph Bay as well. So how do I actually get the body condition of these large baleen whales that are 16 meters in length? So what I do is I use drones, UAVs, and I usually launch them either from land, which was the majority of the East Coast, but the majority of the West Coast was from vessel. And once we saw a whale, we would launch the drone and we would fly over at about 20 to 30 meters once over the whale. And I would put the camera directly down. And that is super important for the calculations to come for the body condition. And I would film each whale that we see for about 10 minutes to get good quality data. Because working with animals, a lot of us might know that it is difficult. We don't usually get what we need for the data, and humpback whales are quite maneuverable, so they can be coming up super fast and be pitching their body, which we don't want. They can be rounding and arching their body, which we also don't want because we can't get that nice length measurement. They can be turning, they can be breaching, which is amazing to see. Not great for data collection. And so we want them really lying flat on the surface with their head up, their tail up. There's no water rushing over their body because that creates the white water, and then we can't accurately get their width measurement. So we need accuracy of their length and accuracy of their width. So these are just some videos out and about on the boat and on the land while collecting data. And I basically had a fantastic team of volunteers with me to be able to collect this data. It's definitely not a one-man show, and I wouldn't have been able to do it without these volunteers and without the team around me. So once I get that video and I am processing that data, so what am I looking to get out of it? So for each individual, I take a still image when they are lying flat on the surface. And that allows me to make measurements on their body, most notably their length and their width. And from these measurements, I can then calculate their body volume. And I will go into more detail about this in the next slide, so stay with me. From their body volume and their body length, I'm using the residuals to actually assign them a body condition. So what exactly do I mean by that? So if we have this graph of total body length on the x-axis and body volume on the y-axis, and we plot every individual. So we're using the log of each of these, because if we didn't use the log, it would go up exponentially, meaning as an individual gets longer, the amount of energy or body volume that they can store is exponential. To assign them a body condition, we don't want an exponential relationship. We want one where we can put in a line of best fit or a regression line and look at the residuals. So for this individual, we can see that it is above this line of best fit, and so they will have a positive body condition, because that line of best fit is what we would expect to see for this population. So for a whale of X length, we would expect them to be of X body volume. And if they are above that, they get assigned a good body condition or a positive body condition. If they're below that, that's a negative body condition. So basically, it's what we have observed for that individual minus what we expected to see when we've collected the data for the whole population divided by that expected. Okay, so what are the results? So we actually did 2 survey years, and in 2017, I was lucky enough to grab that data. I did not collect it. It was from my co-supervisor, and he was out in Flinders Bay and Cape Naturalist, and he surveyed 21 survey days and did 178 UAV flights and 40 hours of flying, which was absolutely incredible because it just beefed up my data set a little bit more. And because I was a PhD student by the time I was collecting this, I had a lot more time on my hands than my co-supervisor did. So in 2021, we did 91 survey days, 236 UAV flights, and over 60 hours of flying. And if we pulled those two together, we had 571 humpback whales to look at my research questions, which was absolutely incredible. So in terms of raw data or numbers, we had 71 cow-calf pairs, and we actually had 4 cow-calf pairs going north, which was quite nice to see. 83 juveniles and 235 adults. The body length ranged from 4.2 in calves meters to 17.1 in adults. And the body condition ranged from minus 0.2 to positive 0.6. Okay, so if we break it down for the research questions, for the results, and if we look at the first research question, basically, what is the energetic cost of migration? So what have they lost during that breeding season from the individuals that I see going north all the way, and when I see them going down south again to their feeding grounds? All right, so if we can only do this for adults and juveniles, because even though we did see cow-calf pairs going north, there was only 4 of them and we could not compare. So I did a pretty simple box plot for this to look at, and if we've got reproductive class on the x-axis, so adults and juveniles, and body condition on the y-axis. 0 is just like the mean body condition for that population. And then in the dark grey, we've got the northern migration, and in the light grey, we've got the southern migration. So north, they're heading from their feeding grounds to their breeding grounds, and south, they're heading from their breeding grounds to their feeding grounds. It might be the opposite way for those in the northern hemisphere. So we can see just by eye that the juveniles are actually losing quite a bit of body condition compared to the adults. And this equated to 23 percentage points, which was quite large. And then the adults were only losing about 13 percentage points. So this was not exactly expected for us, because we were thinking that the adults, they have the added cost of reproduction on their breeding grounds, and the juveniles do not carry that added cost. So what are they doing where they're losing so much body condition on their breeding grounds and during that migration? And we came up with potentially two answers, two explanations. And we figured that potentially the energetic cost of growth is quite high. So we didn't really counter that in, because the juveniles are still growing in length to reach sexual maturity, that cost of that growth could be quite high. And then the second one was mass-specific metabolic rate. So in animals, so the mass-specific metabolic rate in animals actually decreases with increasing body size. So that metabolic rate could then mean that juveniles are carrying that higher energetic cost of maintenance as well as growth. So potentially this is an explanation of why they're losing so much body condition compared to adults. And we actually found this relationship over on the East Coast as well. So if we dive into research question number 2, do fatter whales migrate at a different time compared to a skinny whale? So this looks quite busy, and I'll take everyone through it one by one or step by step. So on the x-axis for migration time, because we're looking at that timing and to see if body condition is influenced by their migration time. So we've got time on the x-axis, which is day of the year. So basically when I saw them go past and when I sampled them. And then on the y-axis, we've got body condition. So up the top row, we've got the adults, and the bottom row, we've got the juveniles. On the left, we've got the northern migration, and on the right, we've got the southern migration. So if we look at adults just going north, we can see that there's not much of a relationship here, and that there are different body conditions migrating at different times. The different colored dots are just the 2 different sampling years, so 2017, 2021. Whereas the juveniles, there was something here which was nice to see. And we can see that the relationship kind of goes down, whereby individuals that are in better body condition, I saw them earlier compared to those later individuals in poorer body condition. And we kind of expected this, to be honest, because with humpback whales, they have a segregation in their migration timing anyway, meaning that different reproductive classes migrate at different times. Here in Australia, we get the juveniles migrating first, and then it's the adults, and last is the pregnant females. Within that cohort of juveniles, we have the yearlings migrating first, and yearlings are basically, they are a year old, they're a yearling, and they stay with their mums for around about that time. So if we see a yearling by itself and not with its mum, they're probably newly weaned from their mum. And so they've been drinking this nutrient, fat-rich milk from their mum for 12 months. So they should be fat, and they are fat. When you see a yearling, you kind of, because you're like, damn, how are you that wide for that long? So they're clearly in good body condition. So we expect that's what's happening here, where we're seeing yearlings migrate first, and we're getting that good body condition with the early migrating individuals. For the adults during their southern migration, we can see the line is very flat, and individuals with all different body conditions are migrating at different times. And similarly with the juveniles as well. So if we look at cow-calf pairs, and I did cow-calf pairs a little bit differently, and I'm going to take you through this a little carefully, because it can be quite confusing. we're not using time or day of year for the migration time, because there's two individuals to think about when we are sampling cow-calf pairs, and we're not thinking of them in isolation. We are thinking of them as one cohort. And potentially, if we're seeing a relationship, it might be because of one and not the other. So we needed to use migration time a little bit differently for the cow-calf pairs. So on the y-axis, I've still got their body condition, but on the x-axis, we're actually using calf relative length, and that relative length is relative to their mother's length, because calf length is highly correlated to mum's length. This is a really good proxy for what we call days postpartum or age. And because we wanted to do this by age of the calf, because calves can be born at any point in time during their migration. As we saw, we had 4 cow-calf pairs on the northern migration. So then it's not just up in their breeding grounds, which they give birth to their calf, and they don't all give birth at the same time. It's all different times. So we can actually see them quite early on during the migration, i.e. the northern migration, already giving birth to their calf. So we wanted to account for these differences in age with the calves. So if we look at the body condition of the calf and their, I guess, days postpartum or migration time, we used a generalized additive model instead of a linear model. And basically, we wanted to account for any curves that we see in this, because calves are the only reproductive class that should be gaining body condition during this migration, because they're feeding on their mum's milk. Maybe that gain in body condition and that growth is not in a linear fashion. So it doesn't just go straight up with time or with age. But we can see here that calves were migrating at different ages, different times, with different body conditions. And similarly for females, for lactating females, body condition did not necessarily dictate their migration time or when we saw them migrating. For something a little bit different, because I did these research questions for the East Coast as well, and I wanted to make this paper a little bit different compared to a paper that I'd already done on a different population. I looked at the best model to predict calf body condition and calf body length. And so I put different variables into this model, and I said, what is the best model? What is the best variable that predicts calf body condition or calf body length? And those variables were mother's body condition and mother's body length. So we can see this graph here is just showing the best model for calf body condition. And we can see that maternal body condition, or their mother's body condition, was the best predictor of calf body condition, basically meaning fat mums have fat calves. And we've seen this relationship on the East Coast population as well. Now for calf body length, the best predictor was the mum's body length. So as I said before, longer mums have longer calves. And we've basically just supported that theory. But also there is the relationship whereby the mother's body condition decreases as the calf gets longer. So as the calf is growing, mum's body condition is getting less and less and less, which is pretty much what we would expect to see. So I knew I had a little bit of time left over with this talk, so I wanted to be a little bit sneaky and add some different results in there as well. So my third chapter was actually comparing the two populations, the East Coast and the West Coast, because I wanted to see if they were in the same body condition or different body condition. But I also wanted to see if they were morphologically similar, or are they different? So when I pulled all of the data for the East Coast and the West Coast humpback whales, it gave me 973 individuals after quality control to work with, which was absolutely amazing. So for their morphology, basically, do they look the same? I was looking at their head length, their width at their eyes, the distance to the blowhole, and their fluke width. And I wanted to see, are they the same or are they different body condition, and why? So for morphology, the individuals on the West Coast are exactly the same as the individuals on the East Coast. So morphologically, they are exactly the same. And why was I looking at their morphology? Why would I think that they're different or they are the same? They're two different populations, and they are putatively, basically meaning we think they are two discrete breeding populations, meaning they don't breed with each other. One goes up the East Coast, one goes up the West Coast, and they don't intermingle, which is what we thought. So why are they morphologically similar, and why aren't they, I don't know, diverging into something different? Well, these two populations, even though they are, they've got breeding grounds on different sides of Australia and they have different feeding grounds in Antarctica, we know from historical whaling data that some individuals do cross feeding grounds. And we can track that all the way back to discovery marks from whaling. So basically, they would give the whale a number, and then when they see that number again, they would record where that whale was. And we can see some of the East Coast individuals were creeping into the West Coast feeding grounds. So we know at least they're intermingling there. But recently, we're actually seeing them cross breeding grounds as well. So individuals that we have seen in Queensland or Hervey Bay, we are noticing in Exmouth Gulf. So they could be, changing, they are changing breeding grounds and breeding in different populations. This is only a handful of individuals, though. It's not like the whole population just decides where they want to go that year. We are only seeing a few individuals do this. So what about their body condition? Are they in the same or are they not the same body condition? So I basically got all of the data of all of the individuals, all of the body conditions, and I just chucked it on a graph. And this was the graph. And I've got body length on the x-axis and body condition on the y-axis. The West Coast are in that pink color and the East Coast are in the blue color. Now, if we go with reproductive classes and we start with the calves, we can see that there's no difference between the calves. They're in a similar body condition to each other on both coasts. And with the juveniles, we are seeing a little bit of a separation there. But if we put this in statistical terms, this was not statistically different. So they are technically still the same body condition. But if we go to the sexually reproductive individuals, we can see that the lines are diverging. And we can see that the East Coast population is in better body condition compared to the West Coast population. And that is for adults and for lactating females. And if we just look at this on a simple box plot, we can see that the calves and the juveniles, that mean body condition, that black dot in the middle, is not too dissimilar from each other. But these ones on the right, the adults and the lactating females, that black dot is getting further away from each other. And if we actually quantify that, we can see that the adults on the East Coast are about 7.7 percentage points in better body condition compared to the West Coast. And on for lactating females, that's 11.1 percentage points where the East Coast is in better body condition. I'm just going to go back to that one. So I wanted to give you guys a couple of reasons why this could be happening. And my first thought was, I sampled them in different years. So that doesn't necessarily make it all the same. So the difference in sampling years could have been the difference in body condition for these two populations. And I wanted to look at the environmental conditions during those years. And when I sampled the East Coast, their feeding season just before I saw them was during an El Nino southern oscillation. So their feeding opportunities could have been better in that year. Whereas when I sampled the West Coast population, I saw them just after a La Nina year. So their feeding opportunities could have been diminished during that year, hence why I'm seeing a difference in body condition between the two populations. I just sampled them at different times. So that's one explanation. Another explanation could be the feeding ecology of these two different populations. We are seeing more and more evidence of supplemental feeding on the East Coast population, most notably in New South Wales in Eden. Individuals are feeding during that migration. These are opportunistic. This is not like they're going to a feeding ground and staying there for 4 months. It's just when the environmental variables just so happen to be good enough that there's enough prey there for them to feed on. We're not necessarily seeing that on the same level on the West Coast population than we do on the East Coast population. So this difference in feeding ecology could be that the East Coast are getting a little bit more of an opportunity to replenish their energy reserves, and therefore it's giving them a little bit more of a buffer. So we have seen this difference in body condition between populations before, and that's by my co-supervisor, Frederick Christensen. He did the body condition of right whales. And if we just look at the North Atlantic right whales, and you know how I said the calves were in good body condition, they weren't different between the two populations, but the lactating females were. So how are these lactating females that are in poorer body condition having calves that are exactly the same body condition as the other population? So we can see that in the North Atlantic right whales, calves were in good body condition, whereas the lactating females were actually in poor body condition, or poorer compared to other populations, but their calves were still in that good body condition. So what this paper speculated was that potentially the North Atlantic right whales are extending that weaning time, so extending the time that the calves spend with them, and potentially they are in just as good body condition, but it's taken them longer to get there. Whether this is happening with humpback whales in Australia, we don't know, but we have seen this pattern before in another species. So I just wanted to finish with what's next. Well, in 2022, we sampled the blue whales in the Perth Canyon as well as Geograph Bay, and we had an absolutely cracking year. And that paper has just been published, but I have put in an abstract into the conference coming up in Perth, the SMM conference coming up in Perth later this year in November. Hopefully I'll be accepted for a talk, and if you guys would like to hear about that manuscript about the blue whales and about the East Coast humpback whale population, I'll be presenting, I'll hopefully be presenting some of that at that conference. So thank you very much.
Lovely. Well done, Grace. Thank you so much for giving such an excellent talk and getting us excited for the conference as well. I'm sure there's lots of people here who wanted to hear about Western Australian humpback whales who are excited for this year and maybe traveling to Australia and getting to see some of these beautiful creatures at the coast or on screen. Just a reminder for everyone, we have the Q&A section if you have any questions. So Teresa and I are standing by to read out any questions you may have to Grace so we can discuss her results. And thank you also for giving us some insights into the East-West comparison. That's super interesting because obviously we couldn't read that in the paper yet. So thanks so much. I also have a question about how weather dependent the drone usage is. Is it affecting the research at all? Because I do a lot of Southern Ocean research and there weather is a big factor. So I'm wondering that.
Oh my God, yeah, definitely. So over on the East Coast, we actually had really good weather for that sampling year, which was absolutely incredible. But when I came to the West Coast, it was one of the worst winters, and that's when the humpback whales migrate during our winter months. It was one of the worst winters that we'd had in years, and we had about a storm a week, sometimes 2 storms a week. So I just at the very start of the season, which is why I had so few individuals, so few juveniles. At the start of the season, I could barely get the drone up to get any data at all, and I'm afraid that I had missed that cohort. I did eventually collect some juvenile, and that's why we combined the 2017 data with the 2021 to bump up those juveniles. But the drone is very weather dependent. I had the Phantom 4, and she is a sturdy beast, but in winds probably above 18 knots, you probably don't want to fly it. And especially off a boat, it gets pretty gnarly sometimes. Off a land, you can pick anywhere if you're in trouble. If there's rain coming, if there's strong winds, if the weather turns on you, you can just hightail it back to land. On a boat, it's a bit different because you're aiming for. I was lucky enough. I was on a 25 meter boat on the west coast. You're aiming for 25 meters, but you're aiming not to crash it as well. So you're aiming to get it safely back in some hands. So it's hugely weather dependent. But compared to the Southern Ocean, I mean, I did fly drones in the Southern Ocean for the orca, and you're dealing with a lot. You're dealing with swell as well as wind. But further down south, I didn't have to deal with it. But further down south, you would have to deal with temperature as well. The low temperatures for those batteries is a killer, and you don't want them to stop working midair as well. So it's challenging, but it's a good challenge.
Super interesting. Thank you. There's a question that's come in about when you say that longer mums have longer calves, I presume that you controlled for the timing or the age of the calf.
Yeah, so that is with that calf relative length to mum's relative length. So that is actually accounting for the age of the calf. And we've seen that relationship from my co-supervisor as well. And once you plot them, it's a very clear relationship. We've seen it on the East Coast, on the West Coast at different times. So yes, we did account for that.
And is the calf adult classification purely length-based?
Yeah, we know from whaling data that the time that they reach sexual maturity, basically going from juveniles to adults, the cutoff that the whaling data gave them was 11.2, and that's because they were able to actually they caught the whales, so they were able to actually see if they were sexually mature or not, and what length they were at that time. And that cutoff was 11.2 meters. So individuals up to 11.2 meters were classified as a juvenile. Above that was an adult. If they were below, but they had a close and consistent relationship with another one, they were classified as calves, and then it was a lactating female instead of an adult. Unfortunately, my study wasn't able to distinguish between sexes for adults. So that reproductive class, we're combining, on the northern migration, we're actually combining pregnant females because we weren't able to distinguish if they were pregnant or not, as well as males and resting females. And then similar on the southern migration, we were combining newly pregnant females, males and non-pregnant females. So that is potentially, a further study that we would love to be able to do, is to be able to get the actual sex of the individuals to see if that has any difference in their migration timing as well, because lumping adults together is a first step. Separating them out into sex is the second step.
Very cool. Teresa, did you want to read some questions as well?
Sure, I'm happy to.
The whole thing. Yeah.
So we have one question that I think pretty much covers what you just said, but go ahead and ask it again, just in case. So one thing you brought up was the fact that whales migrate in cohorts. So your migratory timing seems to be more driven by cohort rather than body condition. And so they're asking, is there any way you could do the analysis within a cohort, for instance, sex, or was the data drone only?
Yeah, so we tried to do the different cohorts as much as we could. So we know those cohorts are juveniles, usually breeding males next, and then non-pregnant females, and then pregnant females. So we tried to go according to those cohorts as much as we could. So juveniles we could do, adults we could do. Unfortunately, we couldn't split them into male female, but then obviously on the northern migration, those pregnant females are lumped in with those adults. So we would love to be able to separate into those sexes. That is a whole different level of funding, unfortunately, because we don't know. Well, if you look at a pregnant female humpback whale, you can say, geez, she's fat, and she carries it lower as well. So she carries it kind of down into her peduncle or her tail region. So just by eye, if you look at 1,000 humpbacks in a season, you can probably tell which one's pregnant and which one's not pregnant. But we don't have any scientific evidence to say that. And we can't in a manuscript say, you know what, they looked fat, so I called them pregnant. So unfortunately, to be able to do that and to get the morphology of pregnant humpback whales, we would need to biopsy. And that is a whole nother level of animal ethics as well. So biopsying just individuals is one thing. Biopsying late pregnant females is another thing. And along with that biopsy, you would need to have a drone on top as well, getting that morphology. So being able to assign them a sex and assign them a morphology, and then determine if that is different enough or statistically different enough from just like, I don't know, a really fat male. So yeah, that I would love to be able to do that, but that's a whole nother level.
Makes a lot of sense. Okay, we got another one. Great presentation and great paper, Grace. Well done. Given your age class categories were based on another paper, Gilborough 1955, with adults considered greater than 11.2 meters, have you considered the possibility of sizes being smaller post-whaling? One of your lactating females was 11.1 meters. Some mature males were also likely to be smaller than 11.2. Could this be skewing your results, particularly for juvenile body condition difference between north and south?
Yeah, fantastic question. That is absolutely amazing. I have a couple of answers to that question. So the first one would be that, you know what, yeah, they can be smaller. And we did get some small lactating females, and we got some small lactating females on the East Coast as well. And if they weren't lactating females, they would have been classified as a juvenile. So for sure, it could definitely have skewed that data. Maybe females reach sexual maturity at a different time compared to males could be something to consider as well. But to be able to account for any errors, and if we are seeing smaller sexual reproductive sizes, to be able to not have that skew in the data, we actually did this thing called bootstrapping, where we sampled the population 1,000 times, or sampled the individual 1,000 times according to an error rate. So that error rate, I believe, was 5%, because that's the error rate of the drone. So we sampled, say, juvenile X 1,000 times, whether their body length was actually higher or was actually lower. So that would account for if sexually mature individuals are getting to that lower end, and we just haven't realized it yet, which I don't think, like, we're not going back to whaling days, we're not going to actually know that answer. But if we account for that error, and if we account for those that sexual maturity being at a lower body length, then we can say, hey, we actually accounted for a 5% error in this, and we then reran all of our models again to see if that made any difference. So if that error crept in and we had juveniles that were misclassified, they might be adults, or adults misclassified, they might be juveniles. Did that make any difference to our results? And the answer is no. The model stood up, and when that result came in for me, I was like, thank you. Because trying to explain going down that path of trying to explain, yes, there's a 5% error and yes, it does make a difference, is a lot harder to say there might be a 5% error and no, that does not make a difference to our models and our results.
Great question. Sophia, I'll go ahead and do one more and then I'll turn it over to you if you want to ask any other ones. So we've got a question from Holly wondering, could you determine sex using the drone and collecting blow sample for DNA rather than biopsy? I.e., are there other techniques you could think about using?
Yes. Yeah, great question. And thank you for reminding me of blow samples. Like, yes, you can, for sure. You can get their genetic analysis from blow samples. So that would be absolutely awesome if we can do that and go down that route instead of the biopsy. So my answer to that would be, you need a particular drone to collect blow samples. And then instead of one person doing the biopsy and one person doing the drone, either you would need 2 drones in the air, which permits don't allow at the moment. You could get a permit that might allow that, or your blow sample drone needs to be your body condition drone. So you need to do 2 things at once. You need to get low enough and get them at the surface to get that blow. And then you need to get high enough to get that body condition, because you can't be that low to get the accurate body condition. And some of my data points was you get 1 surface and 10 seconds of that individual, and then they're gone and you never see them again. So I would imagine you can most definitely do that. Your sample size would just be a lot lower.
Nice one. I have one quick question that might be asking you to very quickly repeat the findings of the paper briefly, because the question is, so are the fat whales migrating sooner or later than the thinner whales?
Well, it depends which reproductive class we're talking about. So for adults and lactating females and calves, no, they are not migrating at different times. For juveniles, yes, they are. We almost found that relationship with juveniles on the East Coast as well, but that was the p-value for those scientists out there. The p-value was just above 0.05, which was super frustrating. Because you're like, is there a relationship there? Maybe, but it's not statistically significant. Whereas the West Coast, it was statistically significant, and the p-value was something like 0.04, which I was like, thank God, thank you. So yes, the juveniles are migrating at different times with different body conditions. So juveniles that are fat and in good body condition are migrating earlier compared to those migrating later. And we think that's just because we're seeing the yearlings first and they're super fat. So, yeah.
That's really interesting given what you've presented about the potential difference between the 2 East Coast and West Coast populations. So, well done.
Yeah.
And I wanted to thank you about putting a little image in my mind this morning, which is the visual image of a fat little wiener. That I think made my day. Thank you so much.
Anytime.
Yeah. I can't see any more questions right now, so I think we can slowly wrap it up. And thanks again for joining us and this excellent talk. We do have something planned for next month, so keep an eye on our socials and the email announcements for this seminar again. And that'll be us from the Society and from Marine Mammal Science. And thank you, Grace.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's been lovely.
Okay, well, like you said, looks like we don't have any more. I'll ask one question that we like to ask on the behalf of students, which I'm sort of throwing at you at the last minute. But obviously, you've recently finished up your PhD. You've gone through that process. You're now on to other things. Do you have advice for students as they're working towards their degrees and then going to the next step? I know it's a broad question, but things that stand out that were, significant things you learned, a piece of advice you would share, anything like that?
Yeah, I think what really helped me during my PhD was time management. You need to be good at managing your own time when you do a PhD, because you are given, or any degree, master's, honors, like undergraduate, you need to be a good time manager. With a PhD, you're basically at the very start of it. It's so daunting because they say, hey, here's 4 years, come up with something good that's worth those 4 years. And you're like, okay. So you need to be able to, I guess, compartmentalize what you need to do and break it down into, I guess, bite-sized chunks that seem achievable for you. So whether that's the first 6 months of just getting a literature review done, getting your confirmation of candidature done, and ticking off those milestones to see that you are actually completing something and you're working in the right direction, I think that is huge. I guess that's for already people doing a PhD. For people that are thinking about doing a PhD, I would say you need to want to do a PhD to do it. It's not, you need to find your own reason why you're doing a PhD, but if the motivation isn't there from the start, it's not going to be there for 4 years and you're really going to struggle. So find a project that you are actually really passionate about and to be like, yeah, I want to do this. This project is made for me. And that'll get you through the 4 years, because I think I had a very different PhD experience compared to a lot of other people. I want to go back and I want to do it all over again. I miss it. Like, I absolutely loved it. There were some really tough times and times where I wanted to throw my laptop against the wall and like scream, and times where I'd not get out of my pajamas all day, but it was amazing. I had a fantastic time doing it. And I think that I put that mainly down to my supervising team, because I had massive champions in my supervising team and they helped me at every single stage. And they were only a text, a phone call, a voice message, an email away, and they would be there to support me. So I think finding the right project and the right supervising team makes all of the difference. So yeah, those would be my pieces of advice. And one more, which I actually said to a couple of friends I think a couple of months ago, and it's something that my dad used to say to me, is work now, rest later. And that's what I did with my PhD. If something was difficult, I would be like, okay, this is my time that I need to work, and I get time later where I get to rest. And I did get time to rest after my PhD. But also, like, you could put that into a day-to-day scenario. So I need to finish this chapter or this paragraph or reading this paper. I need to work now, and then later on this evening I can rest. And finding that work life, that PhD life balance is super important, because your mental health needs to be taken care of, and you need to go out and explore and do the things that you want to do in your life that is separate and completely away from the PhD as well. So I think I found that balance with my PhD, and I did things that I wanted to do and I enjoyed, and then I was like, cool, I can work now, because I have just been out on a camping trip, on a hiking trip, I have just been to the beach, I have just seen my mates at the pub or whatever. And you can put that into context, and you actually get a lot of stuff done when you are doing the things you also want to do at the same time.
That's a great place to end it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time. Thank you to everyone who's still watching. And we'll look forward to seeing future work on your part, Grace, and also future seminars.
Yeah.
Yes, and hopefully see you in Perth as well.
Oh my God,
yes.
Yeah, I'll be there.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks.
See everyone later.
Bye.
Bye.